Hi everyone, it's me, Italian Gamer Joe, and today I am giving you an adventure game tutorial in Construct 3. I'm really excited, let's go ahead and jump in. Before we get started, I just want to show you the final result. So this is a pre-rendered 3D environment that I found for free online. And as you can see here, I have an adventure game that I made that's very simple, and it has a cursor, it has a hotspots, and it has a cursor action bar allowing you to read where you're going to go before you go there. So that's basically part one of this video. So when you're creating a new Construct project, you want to go ahead and name your project. The type that I'm doing today is 720 landscape. You can also do like a full HD or a 1280 by 720, but we're just going to keep it a basic project. I don't know about you, but I'm eager to get my game screenshots into our project, so I just created a folder and I named it backgrounds. So now we have to choose what our object is going to be. I'm going to pick a sprite. A sprite is a object that can be animated. It's basically a 2D or in some cases 3D game object. When we do that, the sprite inspector window opens and we have a lot of cool features available to us. The first thing I'm going to do is lower the speed down to 0, and then I'm going to type in a name for the animation. The first animation that I'm going to do is my pre-rendered house, which I found online for free. So I'm going to go ahead and import that into my adventure game. And as you can see here, we have it. The next thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to duplicate my animations, and I'm going to create a bunch of new ones. So instead of doing like animation frames where every image is a different version of the house, I'm going to separate them into multiple different images. The reason for that is, let's say for example, I want to animate this into a GIF. That might be another opportunity, but in my opinion, it's smart to separate each of your images as different animations. And then also what I'm doing is renaming them so that we know exactly which one we're going into. So that way it's not like 0, 1, 2, 3. It's front of the house, back of the house, stairway, pool, and so on and so forth. And as you can see here, that's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm setting it all up, and then once it's there, the object becomes available in our canvas. So that's what I'm doing right now. The next thing I want to talk about is the viewport. So I don't know if you noticed, but the construct screen is like that big screen was gray, and then I only limited the image's size to a small portion of the screen. That is because the viewport is 1280 by 720. And that viewport is essentially what the player can see. You can increase it to like 1280 by 720 or 4K if you want to do that, but when it comes to the viewport, that would be the jagged edges you see going across the bottom and the near the middle of the screen. That's basically what the player sees. So anything outside that, the player will not see it. So when it comes to designing your layouts, make sure that your objects and your images and your backgrounds stay within the viewport. The next thing I want to talk about is event sheets. So every layout ideally should have their own event sheet, but there are also some additional event sheets that I'm including in my project that I think are important. If you want to get ahead of the curve a little bit, I recommend that you create 2 different event sheets that are not going to be tied to a layout but are important. The first one is input manager, and you can do it 1 word, you can do it 2 words, but input manager. The second one is going to be functions. So create those 2 event sheets, and we'll get to those later. And then there's going to be another layout that I'm going to add called room 0 and front, but ideally you should already have a front layout, or event sheet 1, which will be renamed to front, or I guess maybe the input manager. But yeah, for now, just make sure that your event sheets kind of look similar to mine. So now that we have our environments, what is the next thing that allows us to interact with our environments? Yup, you guessed it, the cursor. The cursor is a tool that many point-and-click adventure games use, as well as just games all across the board. that allow you to interact with your environment. So in order to get that cursor created, we're going to create a folder first, and we are going to name it cursor. We're then going to get an object, we're going to create a sprite, and we're also going to call it cursor. I like to do prefixes for my objects, so like SPR stands for sprite, and then I'll do like SPR underscore sprite. For backgrounds, I might do like BG and then the name underscore the name of the background. If you want to use my like prefix syntax, feel free to go for it. For me, it's just an organizational tool, but you can do it however you want. So what I'm doing right now is I'm designing the cursor, and the first cursor I'm designing is a default cursor, because if the cursor isn't colliding with anything, if the cursor hasn't overlapped any hotspots, we need like a basic cursor, because we want the player to like know the difference between a default situation where they're not doing anything and then the hotspot. So as you can see here, I'm creating some animations, and I'm calling one default, I'm creating one called action, and I'm creating one called question. Don't worry about question is just like maybe a dialogue, maybe it's something, we'll figure that out later. But the two important ones are default and action, and they're only going to have one frame each. If you have like some custom art that you want to import, feel free to do your own, but this is going to be our cursor. So let's continue. So before I proceed to the next step of my game development video, I want to talk about the difference between a global and non-global layer. So as of right now, all of my backgrounds take place on layer 0, which is a non-global layer. A non-global layer only exists in the context of the layout that it's on. So if I were to change layouts to the pool, that layer 0 is completely different than the layer in the front of the house layout. So non-global layers basically are independent, and they exist in their own context of their own layout. If that sounds like a lot, you feel free to rewind and let me hear me say it again. And I know it's a lot, but I'm trying my best to like explain that. So non-global, basically independent, they do their own thing. Global, on the other hand, is a little bit different. They can exist across multiple layouts. But all you have to do is define it once and then reference it anywhere. Now, the thing about global layers is that global layers are more restricted. If you define a global layer and you decide that you want to make changes to it, it affects every other global layer in that layout. There are ways around this, but I want to give the distinction between non-global and global. So in the situation of our cursor object, I don't want to put the cursor on layer 0, and I don't want to, which is a non-global layer. So in order to fix this and to do something, do something easier to code in the future, I'm going to put the cursor on its own layer, and I'm going to call it a cursor layer, and it will be a global layer. This is really important because when we introduce more scenes in our adventure game, all we have to do is define it once and then just include that layer across our entire project. So we're going to do that now, and I'll go ahead and show that to you. So you know how if you're interested in making some cookies with funny shapes like a star or a heart or a moon, you have to get like a cookie cutter. So in the case of Construct, especially in line with global layers, we need to basically define our cookie cutter shape, and we need to do this in a safe place. So what I need to do is I'm going to create a brand new layout and call it Room 0. Room 0 is my terminology, and basically what I'm calling it is a safe space for me to declare all of my global layers. So my cursor layer is going to appear here, and then on the top left corner, after we select our cursor layer, we're going to define it as a global layer. So that means our cursor layer the home of our cursor layer will exist here in Room 0. This is extremely important because if you have global layers existing across multiple places in your project, it'll be really frustrating to have to go and find all of them. So if you can just have all of your global layers in one place and you need to make changes, you know exactly where you need to go. So basically what I did was, to recap, is I created a new layout. I called it Room 0. I created a new layer called cursor layer. I selected cursor layer and then changed it to a global layer on the top left corner. And again, what that does is that it gives you the opportunity to define a cursor layer anywhere else in your project, any other layouts, and it'll basically inherit that information across multiple layouts. So if I'm inside the front of the house layer, I can, put that in easily. If I'm in the pool, I can, just put that layer in, and then I don't have to recreate the cursor or anything. It's just already existing. So now that we've talked about non-global and global layers, the next thing I want to talk about is event sheets and their usage. So remember when I had you create an event sheet called Input Manager? Input Manager is essentially a special event sheet that allows us to handle all of our inputs, including mouse, keyboard, user interface, logic, basically anything that has to do with input and animation for inputs in one single place. That way we declare it in one spot and then we can reference it all across our project. So when it comes to the creation of our cursor object and, getting it to work properly, we're going to put all of that information in the input manager, and then we're going to reference this input manager in the front of the house layout, the pool layout, and so on and so forth. The reason why this is extremely productive and the reason why this is extremely useful is because if we were to not do this and we were to define the cursor logic in all of our other layouts, like the event sheet for pool, the event sheet for, the front, the event sheet for the stairway, that's going to be a lot of code that we're writing. We're going to be writing the same code over and over and over and over again, and that's just a lot of code, and it's going to take up, it's just going to be very messy. So instead of, writing the same code over and over and over again, let's declare it once in this input manager event sheet, and then just have the input manager get called from anywhere else in our project. So the next steps are going to be that. So as you can see here, what I want to do next is I'm using the input manager to make it possible that our cursor can follow the mouse. This is especially important in games like Nancy Drew, where we do need the cursor to follow the mouse during every step. So Construct has something called system every tick. Every tick basically means every second the game is running, do this. So what I'm trying to do next is Construct by default doesn't have objects like mouse and keyboard built into the project. So I created a folder and I basically am creating a mouse object. Once you have the mouse in your project, you can use mouse anywhere in your project. The same goes for gamepad, touchscreen, keyboard. So now what I'm doing is I'm clicking the cursor, I'm scrolling all the way down to the position area, and every tick we're going to set the cursor's position to mouse.x, mouse.y. That basically means we're going to have the cursor follow the mouse on the XY coordinate plane of the entire game. And just to give you a heads up, when it comes to game development and screens, 0, 0 would be the top left corner, and then however big the viewport is would be, in this case it's 1280 by 720, that would be the bottom right corner. So normally in math class that would be negative numbers, but when it comes to screen sizes, 0, 0 is the top left, and then however big the screen in terms of length and width is the bottom right. So now what I'm doing right now is I'm putting the input manager in all of my projects or all of my layouts, so that regardless of what room or layout we are in, the cursor will have that logic of following the mouse. The next thing I'm doing is I'm basically just I'm going into that room 0 and I'm basically doing that as well. I'm putting that layer in there. And right now I'm just typing some notes because it's important to comment your code. That is something I do want to bring up really fast. If you are working on a project like this, please make sure to comment your code all the time. It's not for you right now, it's you for the future. Because if you decide to come back into this project a year from now, 6 months from now, 3 to 4 to 5, 10 years from now, it's important to write comments in your code to help people and yourself understand what exactly you did. So here we are going into our project and we have the cursor working. However, there is something you need to do, and what you need to do is, the cursor's working, but if we want to move in our environment, if we want to interact with the hotspots, there's nothing for us to interact with. So we have this cursor, but we don't have any hotspots yet. So the next plan of action is to come up with some hotspots. In order to make hotspots possible, what we want to do is make a new folder and call it GUI. And then we're going to go ahead and select the sprite and then create a sprite and call it SPR_hotspot. It's important, in my opinion, that hotspots have a transparent sort of color, like blue or green or yellow, whatever your favorite color is, but then also do, like, for the 0 animation, make it like nothing, and then for the 1, make it a color. And then temporarily what we're going to do is we are going to turn the animation frame to 1. Make sure your speed is 0 so it doesn't play the animation on accident. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put our hotspots in the environment. This is especially important because when it comes to your hotspots, you want to be able to see them. Hotspots aren't going to have any good use if they are all invisible. So make sure to color your hotspots and then give them like a blank one as well. So as you can see here, our cursor we have our environment, we have our hotspots, but currently the hotspots just do nothing. They just look pretty. So there are some things we need to do in order to fix our hotspots in order to make them possible. So let's go ahead and get that started. So when it comes to our hotspots, the first thing we need to do is declare instance variables for our hotspots. Instance variables are basically like in coding. If you have an object will have variables that can be assigned to it. Like in this case, we're going to do an ID. We're going to do I'm calling it a scene for now. I eventually change it to a layout, but an ID, a scene or layout, and then action. I'm declaring all of these things as strings. If you don't understand what a string is, I recommend maybe looking up like basic like programming, or just Google string. But basically a string is text. Integer or number is like numeric. And what we're going to do now is we are going to go back to our input manager and we're going to create a group. Groups are just informational. They're not like functional, but they just make your projects look cleaner. And inside our group, we are going to put our hotspot logic. And as you can tell, that's what I named it. So the hotspot logic, what we're going to do is we're going to set it up with if the cursor is overlapping another object. I'm going to change that because I originally did collision, but we're not going to do collision. We're going to do overlapping. So make sure to switch it to overlap instead. And then I just put comments in my code. But the idea is if the cursor is colliding or is overlapping the hotspot, we want the cursor to change red to indicate that the hotspot is, that the cursor is, on something special. It's on something interesting. So what we're going to do, I changed it, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go to that cursor and we're going to change the animation to the action animation. So I could have done a layout. I could have done a cursor frame number, but in this case, I want to do an animation because, if this isn't like a static cursor and it's an animated cursor, then doing an animation would be easier. So as you can see, I am moving my cursor over the hotspots, and you can see that my cursor is going from blue to red to blue to red. And then what I've decided to do is I decided to color my cursor a little bit more because you can't really tell that the cursor is over the hotspot, so I want to just make sure that that it looks colored. Granted, that hotspot won't be visible. And the final layout, it won't be visible, but I think for the case of just recognizability, I just want my cursor to be a little bit nicer, a little bit larger. So I'm going ahead and I'm editing it, and I'm just making it look a little bit cleaner, a little bit larger. So as you can see here, that's pretty much what I did. When it comes to the So as you can see here, I'm just making it look more obvious that my cursor is on the screen, because before it looked kind of small. So now the next thing I want to do is hotspots, in my opinion, should not be in the cursor layer. That's not good, because the cursor layer is a global layer, and those hotspots are based on the scene you're in. So what I did was I created a non-global layer, so it's just a regular layer, and I'm calling it a hotspots layer. The reason why it's not global is because if it were global, then, those hotspots would appear in every single layout that I declare a hotspots layer in, and that's not good because hotspots can be in any location. So make sure that it is a regular layer. And then what I'm doing is I'm clicking on my sprites for the hotspots, and then I'm selecting the hotspot layer so that they stay in that layer. What makes it nice too is that if you have multiple layers in your layout, it's nice to be able to turn on and off the hotspots layer if you want to move things around, or just organizational purposes. So what I'm doing now is I have my hotspot logic, and I have it set up in a way so that if it's interacting with the hotspot, change color, and if it's not interacting with the hotspot, then change back. So now what I'm doing is at the start of my layout, which is a system event, I want to basically make my hotspots not visible, and one way to do that is by setting the frame to 0, the animation frame to 0. That's one way you can do it, but and I'm just showing you that that's one way you can hide your hotspots. But ultimately I decided not to go this route, and you're gonna see me delete this because it's just one way to do it. But the way I'm gonna do it instead is in the top left corner there is a checkbox called initially visible. So all of your layers can be initially visible. Basically what I'm doing is I'm selecting the hotspot layer, and then I'm setting the visibility to not visible. The next thing I'm doing is I'm clicking on my hotspots, and I'm basically typing in for the scene or layout where they should go to. And when I say where, I mean the name that I declared them in my layouts folder. So if it says pool in my layout, I'm calling it pool. If it says front, I'm calling it front. If it says stairway, I'm calling it stairway. The next thing I want to do is I'm creating a functions area. So when you click a hotspot, I am having it run a function, and the function has parameters called action and scene, which I eventually changed to layout, but which, as you can see here, I changed it to layout. So the idea is that when you click on a hotspot, you want the function to get called, and then you want the function that's called click hotspot to be what did the player just click on? Okay, is it an action, or is it a layout change? What exactly are we doing? So what I'm doing now is that I'm basically running some code, and I'm basically saying, if the layout is not empty, so from the hotspot that we clicked on, and if the action is empty, if there's no actions we need to run and the layout is filled in, then we need to go somewhere. And what we're going to do is we are going to go to the name of the layout that we specified in our hotspot. And I haven't wired it up to completely yet, so right now I'm just writing my comments and my code. But what I'm going to do is I am going to add that event, and I'm going to go to the system. I'm going to scroll down to my layouts. I'm going to call the layout by name, and it'll be the parameter I passed into that function, which is the layout from that hotspot. So this is the function I created. What's nice about this function is that you can use this this is a very flexible functionality that can be used for any hotspots future hotspots that I make, and it applies to I can do actions with it, I can go to layouts with it. There's so much we can do with it. The next thing I do is I create an event sheet called functions. So the nice thing about event sheets is that event sheets are global, which means if I created that function once, I can call that function in any other feature event sheet. I can call it anytime I want. I deleted the functions group and I put it outside my functions because I just figured, this is an event sheet with the functions in it. It's kind of redundant. So I basically just have my function here. In my personal opinion, it's nice to have functions in a place where all of your functions can be. So that's kind of like what I do in my projects. I just keep my functions in an event sheet called functions. If you have like functions that are for a specific like puzzle or for a specific thing, you can declare an event sheet and call it like, you know, puzzle functions or whatever the case. But for sake of, you know, easy access, I have a generic event sheet called functions. And now what I'm doing is I am creating that click. So basically, for the mouse on click, if it clicks on a hotspot, we want it to call that function. And then we're gonna call for the action and for the scene, we're gonna do the name of the hotspot dot instance variable. So you can go ahead and look at my screen, kind of like copy it. And what we're doing here is if the mouse clicks on the hotspot, we're going to call the function and we're going to pass into the function the hotspot's information. Because and how does Construct know which hotspot you clicked on? That's something that's done behind the scenes. Each hotspot has a unique identifier assigned to it, which is a number. So when you click that hotspot, Construct just knows you did it. So as you can see, I'm testing my code out and it's working exactly as I imagined. So we're clicking on things, we're doing it successfully. So our adventure game is slowly getting made. But now what we need to do is we're going to areas, but we're not like leaving areas. So what I'm doing right now is I am going into each of my new locations and I'm creating hotspots. I'm creating a hotspot layer, and then I'm putting my hotspots, you know, in that layer in this project, and I'm giving you the opportunity to check this out. And like, you'll notice that I'm just going through the motions, creating the hotspot layer, making sure it's not visible, and then I'm, you know, putting my hotspots in there. And then I'm also changing the layout name so that it always goes back to the front of the house, or I guess in this case that's the backyard, but we're gonna just call it the front. But yeah, it's a arduous process, but honestly, it's saving so much time and energy on repeat code. And as you can see here, we have our fully fledged adventure game. I think I made a little hiccup there. I didn't put the hotspot in the right area, so as you can see here, I'm putting it in the right spot. But yeah, it's when it comes to a functional standpoint, we have our hotspots. We have our hotspots like navigating to the correct areas. So it seems to be working so far. And I think if you're trying to make a basic, you know, adventure game, this is, you know, this is exactly what you would need to get started. And we created this adventure game with minimal code, and we got to like, we did this in a very smart way. If you know the phrase "work smarter, not harder," we basically coded this in a smart way where it's reusable, it's dynamic, and you know, if you need to make small changes, you can make small changes along the way. So the next thing I want to do is, how do you, if you click on a hotspot, you know, or if you hover over a hotspot, what if we give the player some kind of like indication of where they're going to go to next? So then what we're going to do is we're going to create a tiled background, and we're going to do like a cursor action bar. A lot of adventure games have this. Nancy Drew doesn't, but a lot of adventure games do have this. And what I'm doing is I'm creating my tiled background, and tiled backgrounds function differently than sprites. It's only like one background, and what I'm doing is I'm making it black. And this black background, it can be transparent, but I'm making it just a solid, you know, background. And what I'm doing is originally I put it in my layout, but I've decided that I'm going to put it in my user interface. So I'm creating something below the cursor layer, and I'm calling it GUI layer. GUI stands for graphical user interface, and I'm going to make it a global layer. That way I define it in my cookie cutter room for room 0, and then if I reference it by name, I can reference it anywhere in my project. So I have the cursor action bar. Now that I have the cursor action bar, I'm going to declare a new object called the cursor action text. So to make things more dynamic and to not bloat my project up, we are only going to use one text object, and we're going to call it txt_dynamic text. What makes txt_dynamic text interesting is that similar to how we do the hotspot, we're going to declare an instance variable for the text, and we're going to call it ID. This makes coding for text objects really nice, because instead of having like 20, 30, 40 text objects in your project, all you have is one text object, and then you can call that one text object by its ID, which is super convenient and it's super reusable, super rewritable. As you can see here, I'm like styling my text box and I'm declaring my instance variable now for ID. And what makes this important is that the ID, I'm going to be calling it cursor action text. I should have called it there, but I didn't. But if you're trying to get ahead, it's called cursor action text. And, I did write it there as the label, but for my instance variable, it should be cursor action text, all one word. And I did camel case. Camel case is where you do like uppercase and then lowercase and then uppercase for the next word, no spaces. So now what I'm doing is I'm declaring my logic for the cursor action bar or cursor action text. And basically what I'm saying is if the cursor hovers over a hotspot, doesn't click on it, if the cursor is just hovering, what we want to do is we want to make it so that the cursor action bar displays some text. And it's funny because I did this project and I recorded myself doing it, but in hindsight I think I actually could clean this up a little bit more. And maybe you can figure it out in the comments what I can do to clean this up a little bit. But basically what I'm doing right now is I'm going into my hotspot and I'm declaring another instance variable called the cursor action text. And what makes this instance variable interesting is that if the player is going to hover over the hotspot, what will the cursor action text say? So here I'm writing, go to the pool, go to the sideways area, just do these basic things. And what makes this really important is that when the player is interacting with their environment, I think the player should know where they want to go next. Again, Nancy Drew games don't do this, but other adventure games do. And I think it really just depends on what user experience you want, because some games it's great to have this, but other games, if you want to have a more mysterious game where the environments are more elusive, then maybe you don't want this. But if you want a user interface that is a little bit more user friendly, that this is important. One example I can think of that does this is the Persona games, like Persona 5. If the player walks up to a hotspot, it'll immediately pop up with the action text of do this. And I think that's important, especially if your environments don't always have exactly what you need. So now what I'm doing is I'm going into my event sheet and I'm going back into my input manager. And what I'm doing is I'm going to get this logic programmed. And then on the start of the layout, I did set the action text to nothing. This is kind of redundant code a little bit, but it's just a failsafe. Basically what I'm doing is I'm setting the action text to nothing, just in case, because I don't want the player to change rooms and then the action text accidentally got saved. So I want to make sure that the action text just stays blank unless the player truly is interacting with a hotspot. So now what we're going to do is we are going to fill in that cursor action text in the ID like I should have done, and then we're going to go back and start programming that logic. So what we want to do is we want to select the dynamic text with an ID of cursor action text. If you don't do that, by the way, and you just select the dynamic text, if you have multiple dynamic text, it'll change everywhere. So you need to make sure that you're only selecting the dynamic text with an ID of cursor action text. That's how it stays scalable. That's how it stays dynamic. It's extremely important that you do it that way. And then what we're doing is we are setting the dynamic texts. We're setting the dynamic texts value to whatever the hotspot's cursor action text is. And then if the player leaves that hotspot, then we need to make sure the cursor action text resets back to zero. It resets back to nothing again. It's funny. I was doing this hastily, but we can actually clean this up a little bit, and we can actually move this code. We can actually refactor this code a little bit and clean it up. But again, I will, leave that in the comments for now, and then part 2, I will change this. But this is. But as you can see here, just to get that functionality going, I'll go ahead and finish, and you'll see my my functionality and all the changes that I'm making. And yeah, make sure to always comment your code, always make sure it's functional. And as you can see here, you can see that my cursor action text is working, and it's working as planned. So text is showing. I think this is nice because it kind of like animates your adventure game a little bit, and it makes it a little bit more makes it nice. So I think this ends part 1 of my development. For part 2, you'll see some refactors that I'm going to make, and then some additional features that I'll be adding. If you have any questions, feel free to write some comments to me. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe on my YouTube channel as well. But thank you for watching my adventure game tutorial. I will include part 1 I will include it at some point. I will probably put it on my itch.io, and you'll get the opportunity to see it there. But thanks again for watching, and if you have questions, feel free to let me know. I appreciate the support, and stay tuned for part 2.